Have you ever heard of a drug that once made the whole world dance, yet also claimed the lives of thousands? Let us explore the story of Quaaludes, the so-called pleasure pill that once ruled the disco floors, from the legendary Studio 54 to the DEA's list of the most dangerous drugs. This is not merely a tale about a substance, it is a journey through science, commercial ambition, pop culture, and the moral shadows that humans sometimes fail to anticipate. In this video, you will witness how an accidental invention in an Indian laboratory suddenly became a symbol of freedom, pleasure, and later, a social and legal nightmare. From legendary parties and wild dances to shocking accidents and scandals, Quaaludes left their mark on an era, casting both light and shadow. Prepare yourself to sink into a story that is at once thrilling and chilling, where each pill carried joy, yet also served as a powerful warning about ambition and consequence. Sit back, relax, and join me as we step into the world of Quaaludes, a world where history not only teaches us what happened, but also reminds us of what is easily forgotten. As we open the door into the intriguing world of Quaaludes, where disco music pulses through the night and parties stretch until dawn, few people realize that the story of this drug began with what seemed like a harmless accident, one that ultimately altered the cultural and medical landscape of the 20th century. Before Quaaludes became a symbol of liberation, pleasure, and tragedy, it was simply the outcome of a scientific experiment that failed to meet its intended goal, a seemingly small misstep that would usher in an unforgettable chapter of modern history. When science drifts off course, that is often where we witness the power of fateful coincidences. In 1951, in a laboratory in India, two chemists worked tirelessly to develop an anti-malarial drug, hoping to combat a disease that continued to terrify millions. They believed they were on the right path, calculating formulas, measuring concentrations, testing variations one by one, yet the outcome was nothing they predicted. Instead of an effective anti-malarial treatment, they created a new compound called methaqualone, which displayed none of the medical benefits they expected. Through a purely scientific lens, this was a complete failure, a project that consumed time, effort, and funding with no intended result. Yet it was precisely this failure that sparked something extraordinary. During testing, the scientists discovered that methaqualone induced a deep sedative state, a remarkably powerful relaxation effect that surpassed many barbiturates used in medicine at the time. It is difficult to imagine that a failed invention could carry the potential to change the way humans understood tranquility and physical release. They had no idea that, from this laboratory misstep, a wave would soon ripple across the world, pushing methaqualone into throbbing disco clubs, into dorm rooms, and ultimately onto the DEA's list of heavily pursued controlled substances. This story stands as a vivid testament to the surprises that science can deliver. Great ideas sometimes arise from failure, and accidental discoveries can become catalysts for social transformation. Methaqualone, seen through the eyes of the chemists, was a medical failure. Yet over time, it became a cultural icon, proof that not all success originates from careful intention. Like an unexpected brushstroke on the vast canvas of history, this accidental compound laid the foundation for a narrative both enchanting and alarming, where science, culture, and ethics collide. Imagine the scene in 1951, laboratory benches crowded with instruments, crystal-clear bottles filled with strange liquids, and two chemists with unwavering focus trained on numbers and chemical reactions. Everything was measured with precision, every step meticulously considered, yet the world outside was on the verge of witnessing a shift they could never have predicted. A compound was born that no one expected to shake social structures, redefine the pursuit of pleasure, and eventually force the pharmaceutical world to confront its own ethical boundaries. What's even more astonishing is that methaqualone was not just an ordinary sedative, it carried within it a peculiar kind of promise, a total body calm, a dissipation of tension unlike anything people at the time had experienced. Even without commercial ambitions or long-term research, methaqualone revealed something profound, that science occasionally produces nameless gifts, fateful materials whose value becomes clear only when they enter real life. This was a moment when pure research brushed against popular culture, in a subtle and unexpected way. The most captivating part of this story lies in how a failure inside a laboratory could spawn consequences far beyond anyone's imagination. Methaqualone was found to produce natural, restorative sleep with fewer side effects and to relax the entire body with remarkable efficiency. Yet few understood that these very qualities would transform it into a recreational tool, into a key that unlocked the era of legendary disco nights and euphoric parties, where people sought joy and liberation from societal constraints. A scientific compound, once nothing more than a mistake, suddenly became an indispensable part of 1970s culture. With every drop of methaqualone synthesized in that laboratory, history was not only witnessing a new chapter in the evolution of sedative drugs, it was also setting the stage for a cultural adventure. Those tiny pills held the power to alter mental states, connect people through music, movement, and pleasure, yet they would also teach the world an unforgettable lesson about power and responsibility. Quaaludes, born from an accident, became living proof of the saying. The mistake of today may become tomorrow's miracle, but it may also become an unforeseen disaster. And from that very coincidence, methaqualone began a long journey filled with wonder and sorrow. It would leave the Indian laboratory, cross oceans, and weave itself into the fabric of society, not only as a sleeping pill but as a symbol of joy, physical liberation, and hedonistic escape. However, this same journey would gradually reveal the shadows hidden beneath its surface. Unintended effects, health risks, moral dilemmas that society was never prepared to confront. This accidental compound, glowing under the light of scientific discovery, brought excitement and curiosity, yet in the darker corners of everyday life, it became a stark warning. Sometimes unexpected discoveries open not just opportunities but also responsibilities and consequences that humanity must face. Methaqualone, soon to be known as Quaaludes, would teach us to see science not only through the lens of intended outcomes but also through its social, cultural, and ethical ramifications. And from here, as we continue into the next chapter of this story, from the Indian laboratory to the legendary dance floors of New York, you will see how a tiny pill could redefine an entire era, from the dazzling brightness of disco to the tragic shadows of accidents, scandals, and legal battles. It was this coincidence, this deviation from scientific intent, that laid the groundwork for the story of Quaaludes, a symbol both mesmerizing and cautionary, one that history and culture continue to echo to this day. Now that we understand the wondrous, accidental origins of methaqualone, we can begin to see that the next step in its journey was commercialization. Where science meets ambition, and where a small discovery in a quiet laboratory suddenly transforms into a pharmaceutical bombshell, ready to reshape the way people experience sleep and pleasure. From the glass vials of an Indian research lab, Quaaludes would soon step into the light, given a name meant to evoke calm, and begin a public life both dazzling and fraught with danger. In 1965, the William H. Rohrer Company, recognizing the immense potential of methaqualone, decided to convert this compound into a commercial product under the name Quaalude, a name chosen with deliberate care to conjure a sense of peace, safety, and natural ease. More than a marketing strategy, the name itself was a promise, a deep sleep, a serene mind, and a body fully at rest. Quaaludes were introduced as a superior alternative to barbiturates, the sleep medications dominating the market at the time but known for their risks and severe side effects. Quaaludes were advertised with impressive benefits, high effectiveness, low overdose risk, natural feeling sleep, and clearer awakening. It sounded perfect, and at that moment, the American market was ready to embrace what appeared to be the pharmaceutical miracle of its era. Within only a few years, the number of Quaalude prescriptions soared to an astonishing 34 million per year, a figure the pharmaceutical industry had never witnessed for any sleep medication. The image of Quaaludes, once a mere laboratory accident, had ascended to stardom in medicine cabinets across the country, trusted by doctors and consumers alike. The sense of power held by the Rohrer Company during this period is almost unimaginable. They were not merely selling a drug. They were selling an experience, a promise of tranquility, deep rest, and relief from the strains of modern life. Yet behind the statistics and the glowing advertisements, those small white tablets concealed a second, unexpected potential, an effect clinical trials had never anticipated. Each pill did more than deliver peaceful sleep. When users resisted drowsiness and tried to stay awake, something new began to unfold. A floating sensation, lowered inhibitions, heightened pleasure both tactile and emotional. This secret had never been tested by pharmaceutical researchers, but young people and party communities discovered it almost immediately. What had been introduced as a simple, sleeping pill soon became a sought-after recreational substance, used to push emotional boundaries, enhance sensation, and unlock experiences for which it had never been intended. This was the moment when Quaaludes stepped beyond the reach of scientists and marketers. These tiny tablets became a symbol of freedom and indulgence in a decade when American culture was shifting at dizzying speed. The rise of Quaaludes was not only the story of a medical breakthrough, but also a powerful reminder that humanity does not always use science according to its designer's intentions. A product built for healing can transform into a recreational tool, and at times, a cultural icon. Unleashing consequences no creator can fully control. The influence of Quaaludes stretched far beyond anything Rohrer had imagined. As the drug spread, college dormitories, private house parties, and eventually the booming disco clubs, where music, lights, and bodies swirled together, turned Quaaludes into a true star. It was no longer merely a medication, it became a bridge between peace and pleasure, between relaxation and liberation. The name Quaalude, once meant to evoke quiet rest and natural sleep, had now become a symbol of joy, intimacy, and a new way of living. It stood as proof that the commercialization of science can generate social forces no company can ever fully foresee. The rapid rise of Quaaludes also raised ethical and legal questions that the pharmaceutical industry would wrestle with for decades. When a product marketed as safe produces unanticipated side effects, who bears the responsibility? At that time, the Rohrer company had every reason to celebrate its soaring profits, but it was also planting the seeds of serious problems that would soon erupt in the following decade. This was the first major lesson Quaaludes offered the world: the power of science and commerce cannot be measured solely by financial success or widespread adoption, it must also be judged by how well society can manage the consequences that follow. To fully understand this, imagine the doctors who wrote the very first Quaalude prescriptions. They saw an extraordinary tool, something that could help patients sleep and unwind, but no one could have predicted that these same pills would become icons of the party scene, centerpieces of cultural expression, and eventually the source of personal and social tragedies. The birth of Quaaludes reminds us that early success can easily overshadow latent risks, and that the true power of scientific discovery extends far beyond its intended medical purpose. What is even more noteworthy is how quickly Quaaludes captured public trust through intelligent marketing. Advertisements emphasized safety and superior effectiveness, reassuring consumers, and gradually, the drug became part of daily life. Yet beneath this veneer of comfort lay an unchecked potential. A small pill capable of transforming an ordinary gathering into an emotional journey, sometimes leading to risky choices or unforeseen behaviors. In this period, Quaaludes were truly a pharmaceutical bombshell, not because they were instantly dangerous, but because they held within them possibilities that society was unprepared to face. The emergence of Quaaludes also stands as a vivid testament to the influence of marketing within the pharmaceutical world. When Rohrer chose the name, designed the packaging, and promoted the promise of natural sleep, they crafted a perfect image in the minds of consumers, a safe, comforting remedy. Yet this very image encouraged people to overlook warning signs, opening the door for widespread recreational use in parties, dormitories, and nightlife communities. Quaaludes became living proof that branding can, at times, overshadow a product's true nature. And so, from a laboratory accident, Quaaludes embarked on an extraordinary journey, from a failed medical compound to a commercial triumph, and ultimately into popular culture as both a source of joy and a looming nightmare. The second chapter of this story reveals not only the explosive rise of a drug, but also profound lessons about ethics, responsibility, and the unpredictable ways humanity can harness science and commerce. With all this in mind, we can see that Quaaludes were never just a pharmaceutical product, they were a cultural symbol, a convergence of science, marketing, and society, but also a cautionary reminder of the hidden risks that emerge when human ambition exceeds our ability to control it. From here, the journey of Quaaludes will carry us into legendary disco parties, moments of pleasure and liberation, and ultimately toward the shadows, dangers, and tragedies that no one ever anticipated. When Quaaludes stepped out of the laboratory and began making a bold impression on the American pharmaceutical market, as a pill marketed as safe, effective, and low risk, no one imagined that those very tablets would soon reveal an unimaginable secret, a hidden power that scientists, doctors, and even the Rohrer Company itself had never foreseen. What began as a calming sedative gradually transformed into something young people sought not for sleep, but for a completely different purpose. An uncharted state of pleasure and self-liberation that science had never intended to create. This was a pivotal moment, where commercial ambition and scientific intention intertwined, unleashing a wave of fascination and danger in equal measure. The high without the sleep quickly became what young people truly desired, and this was the very point at which Quaaludes underwent their extraordinary transformation from a safe sleeping pill into the pleasure drug of youth culture. At first, users believed Quaaludes would help them sleep deeply, ease stress, and relax their bodies. But it did not take long for them to discover something remarkable. If they forced themselves to stay awake after taking the pill, it created a floating, full-body lightness, lowering inhibitions, heightening sensitivity to sound, light, and touch, and naturally amplifying sexual pleasure without any external stimulation. This discovery completely changed the way Quaaludes were used, shifting them from a medical tool into a symbol of joy, freedom, and emotional release. Rumors about these hidden effects spread swiftly across college dormitories, private house parties, and eventually nightclubs. No one was taking Quaaludes just to sleep anymore. Young people sought them out to experience that lift into a carefree state where worries dissolved and social barriers quietly fell away. Quaaludes became a bridge between music, the body, and emotion, turning every dance move, every note, every touch into something more vivid. Gatherings that had once been merely social occasions suddenly transformed into spaces filled with radiance, freedom, and an intimacy many had never felt. What was both fascinating and frightening was that this effect lay entirely outside the control of the pharmaceutical industry. Rohrer manufactured Quaaludes as a sleep aid. Doctors prescribed them to patients for relaxation and rest. But none of them anticipated that the same pills would become a pathway to youthful hedonism. This was a clear demonstration of how unpredictable drugs can be. A scientific invention, once introduced into real life, can evolve in ways its creators never predicted. The widespread use of Quaaludes among young people also revealed a unique cultural shift in the 1970s. This was a decade in which youth longed for new experiences, new forms of self-expression, and new ways of shedding societal constraints. Suddenly, Quaaludes became the key that unlocked that door. As disco music filled nightclubs with its pulsing rhythms, as lights shimmered and bodies followed hypnotic beats, Quaaludes acted as a spiritual catalyst, helping people feel life, pleasure, and connection more intensely than ever before. This sleepless high also brought a sense of power and freedom that users had never known. The small, seemingly harmless tablets became tools for self-exploration, for pushing limits, and for elevating feelings to their peak. From university dorms to elite parties, young people quickly realized that Quaaludes did more than relax them. They opened a completely new emotional landscape. Lowered inhibitions, heightened sensations, and moments of joy and exhilaration far beyond anything a medical sedative had ever been designed to create. This was the turning point where a scientific invention became an inseparable part of pop culture and entertainment. Yet, alongside this pleasure and novelty, the discovery carried risks that could not be ignored. When users began taking Quaaludes to get high rather than sleep, the dangers to their health, behavior, and social environment multiplied. The drug's suppressive effects, especially when combined with alcohol or other substances, could lead to loss of control, accidents, or even fatal consequences. This marked the beginning of serious issues that medicine and society would be forced to confront. When a drug steps beyond its intended purpose, it ceases to be a controlled tool and becomes a force capable of reshaping personal lives and social landscapes, often in dangerous ways. Stories from college dormitories, large city parties, and disco clubs all echoed the same theme. Quaaludes, once a sleeping aid, had become the pill of pleasure. They allowed people to forget pressures, worries, and social expectations, stepping instead into a world of music, sensation, and delight. But this transformation also exposed an unexpected darkness, loss of control, misuse, and behaviors that led to serious consequences. The story of Quaaludes' unveiled secret is a profound lesson in how humans interact with science and pharmaceuticals. It reminds us that accidental discoveries do not simply bring benefits, they can also create opportunities, temptations, and consequences no one anticipates. From this revelation onward, Quaaludes would enter their golden age in disco culture, becoming a symbol of freedom and pleasure while quietly planting the seeds of future personal and societal tragedies. Throughout this journey, we see that the power of a drug does not reside solely in its chemical formula, but in how people choose to use it. When used correctly, Quaaludes provided peaceful sleep and relaxation. But when repurposed, they became a cultural emblem. A tool for sensation-seeking and a catalyst for unprecedented behaviors. It is proof that even a small scientific invention can alter culture and society in profound ways once it enters the real world in unexpected forms. And from here, the story of Quaaludes moves into a new chapter, one where these small pills brought joy and exhilaration, but also revealed boundaries, risks, and difficult lessons about ethics, responsibility, and control. As the secret of the sleepless high spread widely, Quaaludes ceased to be merely a medical product and became a symbol of both light and shadow, joy and tragedy, freedom and danger, a relic of an era where music, the body, and emotion merged into the fevered rhythm of the 1970s. This is the moment when the audience realizes that from an accidental laboratory discovery, Quaaludes had taken an extraordinary journey, from sleeping pill to a coveted tool for extreme sensation. And it is from this transformation that we begin to see clearly the mesmerizing yet perilous story Quaaludes would continue to tell, from the dazzling lights of disco to the shadowed corridors of abuse, accidents, and the social turmoil this drug would eventually bring. As the secret behind the "stay awake high" of Quaaludes began to spread, young people in America no longer saw this drug as merely a tool for relaxation or a way to achieve deep sleep. Those small pills had become instruments for self-discovery, emotional release, and the unlocking of experiences never felt before. From college dormitories to private parties, Quaaludes moved swiftly from curiosity to fascination, from a medical aid to a symbol of freedom and pleasure. This transformation paved the way for a period when drugs, music, and the human body blended together, forming a unique cultural phenomenon. The explosive disco era, where Quaaludes stepped onto the main stage of pop history. The disco boom, the moment when Quaaludes became the emblem of an era, this was the height of their popularity, far beyond anything the pharmaceutical industry had ever imagined. The 1970s were a time of sexual liberation, the flourishing of disco culture, and a period when music became a vessel for freeing the body, the emotions, and the sense of identity. In this context, Quaaludes arrived at precisely the right moment, in the right place, acting as the perfect catalyst that transformed every dance, every party, every flashing neon light into an experience of pure pleasure and liberating joy. It was no longer a sleeping pill, it had become the heartbeat of an era, a means for people to connect, to open up, and to feel joy at its most intense. Inside Studio 54, the world-famous temple of disco, Quaaludes became an essential part of the nightlife. The club's owners not only kept the pills behind the bar but stuffed them into their pockets, ready to spread the joy, a symbolic gesture showing just how deeply this drug had seeped into popular culture. Guests at Studio 54, from celebrities to everyday music lovers, could access Quaaludes as casually as if they were candies. Part of the lifestyle, part of the moment, a tool to break free from social restraints and emotional barriers. The widespread use of Quaaludes in these clubs was not merely about the drug itself, it reflected a way of living, a new perspective on freedom, pleasure, and uninhibited joy. The nicknames that Quaaludes acquired during this era, Disco Biscuits, Ludes, Lemons, 714, were more than playful labels. They were evidence of its profound cultural resonance. Each nickname pointed to the familiarity and ubiquity of the drug, so well known that everyone recognized it instantly. Quaaludes were no longer just pills, they were symbols, a part of the social vocabulary, woven into the stories young people shared through music, light, and the rhythm of their bodies. They belonged to a movement, to a time when personal freedom and pleasure stood at the forefront of a cultural shift. The power of Quaaludes in the disco era lay not only in their chemistry, but in their ability to create sensory experience. When users danced to the pulsing rhythms of disco, they could feel each step, each sway, each heartbeat more vividly, more naturally. The drug lowered inhibitions, heightened sensations, and opened people up to one another, dissolving social boundaries and drawing strangers into moments of deep connection. This was a phenomenon unlike anything seen before. A medical product escaping its intended purpose, becoming a spiritual tool, a bridge between people, and an essential part of cultural and social experience. Yet, the very popularity and widespread use of Quaaludes in disco parties soon revealed their darker side. The reduction of inhibitions, combined with alcohol or other substances, created dangerous situations, loss of control, risky behavior, and alarming accidents. Stories of overdoses, injuries, and harmful consequences began to circulate, revealing the hidden dangers that neither Rohrer nor the medical community had anticipated. Disco was not only lights and music, it also carried shadows, places where joy and pleasure could slip into tragedy. A deeper analysis of the culture of that era shows that Quaaludes were not only catalysts for personal experience, but symbols of a broader social movement. The disco era embodied openness, personal freedom, and a desire to test boundaries, and Quaaludes became the embodiment of that spirit. As music, light, and the human body intertwined, the drug reshaped not only how people felt the world, but also how they interacted with one another. It opened emotional doors, allowing people to reveal themselves, to express joy, and to explore sensations that might once have been hidden away. What was remarkable was that Quaaludes did not discriminate. Movie stars, singers, musicians, and ordinary clubgoers were all drawn to the experience it promised. It erased social distance, pulling everyone into the same rhythm, the same dance, the same shared sense of escape. In this sense, Quaaludes became a true symbol of the decade, woven into the cultural narrative of music and nightlife, far beyond the reach of pharmaceutical regulation or medical labels. Yet the intermingling of drugs and disco culture also offered a powerful lesson. Pleasure does not come without risk. As Quaaludes grew more widely used, misuse and dangerous combinations became common, leading to health crises and legal problems. Disco was light, rhythm, and joy, but it also hid risks, and Quaaludes became the bridge between euphoria and potential catastrophe. The stories of Studio 54, of parties bathed in lights and sound, and of Quaaludes passed around as though they were part of the decor, all of these pieces formed a vivid portrait of the disco age. It was not simply a story about a drug, it was a story about people, about society, and about how a small scientific invention could ripple through a cultural movement, transforming personal experience and becoming a symbol of an entire decade. From a laboratory in India, to the American pharmaceutical market, to the electrifying dance floors of the disco era, Quaaludes traveled an extraordinary path. They evolved from sleeping pills into symbols of an age. At once joyous and dangerous, offering peak sensory pleasure while teaching hard lessons about control, ethics, and responsibility. As disco exploded, Quaaludes became a living emblem of joy, freedom, and the risks woven quietly beneath the glittering surface. This is the moment when viewers begin to realize that Quaaludes were never just a medical product or a scientific invention. They were a cultural phenomenon. A symbol both enchanting and cautionary, radiant and shadowed under the disco lights. Their journey reveals that the power of a pill lies not only in its chemical properties, but in its ability to reshape how people experience the world, connect with one another, and push the boundaries of emotions they never knew existed. As the disco lights slowly faded, as the parties wound down, and as the music softened after nights of feverish dancing, an undeniable truth began to surface. Quaaludes, the pill once celebrated as a symbol of joy and freedom, carried a darkness that could no longer be ignored. The floating euphoria, the lowered inhibitions, and the waves of pleasure that swept through its users made many forget that this was not merely a tool for entertainment, it was a potent chemical, capable of profoundly altering both the body and the mind. And when people blended Quaaludes with alcohol, something that seemed harmless but was in reality a deadly formula, devastating consequences began to unfold. The dark side, accidents, deaths, and the collapse of any illusion of safety, revealed a harsh portrait behind the golden years when Quaaludes dominated the cultural scene. The disco era was not only filled with light, music, and pleasure, it was also shadowed by lethal risks. Reduced inhibition and the loss of physical control, especially when combined with alcohol or other stimulants, triggered a series of accidents and tragedies. The numbers were impossible to overlook: comas, respiratory failure, vomiting, suffocation from being unable to turn one's body while unconscious, all were heartbreaking outcomes caused by a single small pill. These stories, echoing from emergency rooms to courtrooms, began to shatter the carefully crafted image of absolute safety that the Rohrer Company had so confidently promoted. Severe traffic accidents occurred with alarming frequency, stark reminders of the dangers hidden in the misuse of Quaaludes. Among the most infamous was a bus crash in the UK, where the combination of the drug and impaired control resulted in catastrophic loss. This was not merely a personal tragedy. It served as a warning to society at large. When recreational drugs escape their intended boundaries, they jeopardize not only the user's safety but also the safety of everyone around them. Quaaludes, once a symbol of indulgence, had become a living threat, forcing people to reconsider what freedom and safety truly meant. What was even more frightening was that many people first used Quaaludes without understanding its effects or the risks it carried. Confidence in its supposed safety, coupled with the immediate sensation of floating bliss, led many to ignore early signs of danger. When tragedy struck, urgent questions of responsibility, ethics, and regulatory oversight emerged. Who was to blame for the deaths? The manufacturer? The prescribing physicians? The users themselves? These questions lingered for years, exposing painful gaps in pharmaceutical oversight and public education. These tragedies did not remain confined to nightclubs or disco dance floors. They seeped silently into everyday life, into homes, families, and communities. Users lost control, behaviors shifted, and accidents and deaths unfolded one after another. A pill crafted for medical use had transformed into a source of grief, loss, and a widespread collapse in the very concept of safety. The stories of victims, those who died, those who were left permanently injured, were no longer rumors. They were sobering realities that forced both the pharmaceutical industry and society to confront the consequences of misuse. The sparkling imagery of Studio 54, the neon lights, the pulsing music, the intoxicating joy, slowly became overshadowed by heartbreaking shadows. Doctors, researchers, and regulators began to recognize that while Quaaludes offered momentary pleasure, they also produced long-term effects that were dangerous and nearly impossible to contain. Every pill, every party, every participant carried risk, and these risks became increasingly visible as medical and legal reports accumulated. Another striking dimension was the way the drug intertwined with social behavior. Lowered inhibitions meant people made reckless decisions, from driving under the influence to engaging in unsafe sexual activities. This was the dark side no one had anticipated. A medical product originally designed to help people relax and sleep had become a catalyst for personal and social danger. Quaaludes, in those years, embodied the saying, "Excessive pleasure always carries a cost." The widespread use of Quaaludes within the disco community also revealed how easily collective control could be lost. When thousands consumed the drug together at large parties, risks multiplied exponentially. Music events grew both mesmerizing and perilous. Shared waves of intoxication, synchronized reckless behavior, and unpredictable outcomes. Disco, once the emblem of freedom and ecstasy, had also become the stage for tragedy when Quaaludes spiraled beyond anyone's control. For the Rohrer Company, this became a nightmare they never anticipated when releasing their product. Pills once marketed as perfectly safe had become the source of lawsuits, accidents, and ethical scandals. Their brand image deteriorated, public trust eroded, and regulatory agencies intervened with increasing force. A once successful medical product had turned into a case study illustrating how commercial ambition can collide with societal safety. A deeper analysis reveals that the dark side of Quaaludes was not confined to physiological effects, it extended to behavioral and cognitive changes. Lowered inhibitions, heightened sensations, and the mixing of substances created a volatile cocktail of unpredictable actions. This exposed a vital lesson for both the pharmaceutical field and society: even a drug proven safe under medical conditions can become profoundly dangerous when misused or abused. The accidents and deaths linked to Quaaludes highlighted long-standing failures in pharmaceutical education and regulation. Users lacked proper information about the risks. Doctors prescribed it based on incomplete data, regulators failed to issue timely warnings. It represented a collapse in safety awareness across multiple layers of society, from individual choices to community norms, from the medical field to the entire entertainment culture. Quaaludes, with all its seductive charm, became a living reminder of what happens when pleasure is not paired with knowledge and restraint. From dazzling disco parties and shimmering lights to wild dances and euphoric nights, Quaaludes' dark side slowly emerged with stark clarity: death, accidents, loss of control, and social collapse. It stood as a testament to the double-edged nature of pharmaceuticals, capable of bringing pleasure and emotional release, yet equally capable of unleashing uncontrollable danger. This was a grim yet necessary chapter in the story of Quaaludes, reminding us that excessive indulgence, no matter how tempting, inevitably carries risks, and that control, knowledge, and responsibility are indispensable when approaching any drug, no matter how small or popular. And from these accidents, deaths, and tragedies, the story of Quaaludes transitioned into its next chapter, where law, ethics, and society were forced to confront a difficult reality. A once beloved product had become the enemy of the very community that embraced it. This dark chapter was not merely a wake-up call, it was a powerful reminder of the hidden consequences behind any chemical substance, a message that would guide the turbulent, complex chapters that followed in the history of Quaaludes. When the disco parties finally faded, when the vibrant lights dimmed and the waves of euphoria from those Quaalude pills slowly dissolved, a painful truth began to surface. The tiny tablets that once symbolized joy and freedom had also become instruments of crime and exploitation. The dark side we have already witnessed, accidents, deaths, and loss of control, was merely the beginning of a deeper, more unsettling chapter, in which Quaaludes were manipulated in cruel and predatory ways, shifting from a symbol of pleasure to a predator's weapon. The tragedies of the disco era were only the visible tip of the iceberg, revealing a darkness no one wanted to face, yet everyone eventually had to acknowledge. The chapter in which Quaaludes became a predator's weapon is perhaps the most painful in the history of a drug once loved by so many. With their ability to lower inhibitions, impair self-defense, and induce short-term memory loss, Quaaludes were quickly exploited by those with malicious intent. At first, society did not fully recognize the danger, still dazzled by the glamour of disco and the thrill of personal pleasure. But gradually, cases of abuse emerged, and the truth became undeniable: Quaaludes were not merely a recreational joy, but a tool capable of paralyzing victims, stripping them of resistance, and erasing their memories of what had been forced upon them. A prominent example, brought to light many years later, involved the scandal surrounding Bill Cosby. In the hands of attackers, Quaaludes became a subtle yet horrifying weapon, one that rendered victims unable to fight back, unable to remember, and unable to protect themselves. Pills that once symbolized carefree bliss had now been twisted into instruments of psychological and physical assault, forcing society to confront a painful reality: a drug can be a double-edged blade, offering pleasure to one person while bringing danger to another. This phenomenon did not remain confined to the elite disco scene. It spread across all layers of society. From college students to ordinary workers, from average individuals to famous celebrities, anyone could become vulnerable to exploitation or suffer the consequences of misuse. With their ability to diminish inhibitions and impair control, Quaaludes became a perfect instrument for crime society had never truly encountered before. This marked a profound turning point. A moment when the conversation around drugs shifted from issues of health and entertainment to questions of ethics, law, and human rights. The very nature of Quaaludes, reducing tension, heightening pleasure, and inducing temporary memory loss, made them uniquely dangerous in the wrong hands. Used appropriately, they brought users a sense of relief and gentle euphoria. But used maliciously, the same pill became a near-perfect mechanism for domination. The ability to erase short-term memory meant that victims often could not recall the events, making it nearly impossible to report or prove they had been assaulted. This created a cycle of crimes that society struggled to identify or prevent. These stories slowly revealed a threat far deeper than anyone expected, and they shook public confidence in pharmaceuticals and the systems meant to regulate them. Another troubling aspect was how long it took society to recognize the danger. While young people reveled in disco's intoxicating pleasures, acts of abuse were unfolding silently in the shadows, hidden beneath neon lights and pulsing beats. This disparity created a frightening paradox. A drug once marketed as safe and joyous had become an invisible weapon, a silent assailant capable of inflicting irreversible harm. In this chapter, Quaaludes embodied the sobering truth that anything powerful and alluring can be exploited when knowledge and control are lacking. The lessons from this era extended far beyond individual tragedies. As more incidents of abuse were exposed, society began to reassess the role of pharmaceuticals, the responsibility of drug manufacturers, and the rights of victims. Quaaludes, once celebrated as a symbol of emotional liberation and pleasure, became a reminder of ethics, duty, and human dignity. They forced the medical community and society at large to rethink drug regulation, educate users, and protect those most vulnerable. It is undeniable that Quaaludes also opened the door for society to recognize the hidden dangers behind other recreational substances. These small pills, once solely associated with joy, became a stark illustration of how human beings tend to exploit powerful tools for both good and harm. A scientific invention, if left uncontrolled, can devolve into an instrument of wrongdoing, and Quaaludes stand as one of the clearest examples of this truth. Seen from a broader perspective, the phase in which Quaaludes became a predator's weapon represents the darkest turning point in the drug's story. From a laboratory in India, to the American pharmaceutical market, to disco dance floors and deeply personal scandals, Quaaludes traveled an extraordinary, yet deeply tragic path. They were symbols of pleasure and liberation, and at the same time, tools of violation and danger, capable of delivering intoxicating highs, yet also sowing immense risk. This chapter also exposed the limits of medicine and society. No drug, no matter how widely trusted, can ever be entirely controlled. Pleasure never comes with absolute safety. In this chapter, Quaaludes serve as a sobering reminder. Everything powerful carries two faces, joy and danger, pleasure and tragedy. Their allure did not simply captivate users, it challenged society to confront consequences that could no longer be ignored. Thus, from the shimmering lights of disco, from the euphoric highs and carefree emotions, Quaaludes entered a terrifying new phase, one marked by exploitation and abuse. Each pill became a tool, a weapon, a hidden trap that society had to learn to recognize and prevent. This chapter, though dark, was necessary. It taught the world invaluable lessons about ethics, responsibility, and the importance of control when dealing with any pharmaceutical product, no matter how small, common, or enticing it may seem. And from this chapter of tragedy, exploitation, and human suffering, the story of Quaaludes moved into a new era. One where law, ethics, and public awareness were forced to confront reality. A beloved drug could become a threat to the very community that once embraced it. Control, regulation, and education were no longer optional, they became vital, life-saving measures to prevent new tragedies from unfolding. When Quaaludes began to slip beyond every expectation the pharmaceutical industry had ever set, evolving not only into a source of pleasure in the glittering disco era but also into a tool of crime in the hands of predators, the story of this once celebrated drug entered a new and far heavier chapter. It was a chapter in which legal, ethical, and social consequences began to converge upon the companies responsible for producing it. From a symbol of carefree enjoyment, Quaaludes transformed into an immense burden, exposing a harsh truth: in the world of pharmaceutical business, profit and reputation do not always align with responsibility. And it was in this moment that society witnessed a full-blown pharmaceutical crisis. One in which profits could no longer compensate for a shattered reputation, and where misjudgment, inadequate oversight, and the influence of media pushed a pharmaceutical company to the brink of reputational collapse. The pharmaceutical crisis, when profit could not outweigh reputation, became the defining story of Rohrer, the company that first produced Quaaludes, and the far-reaching consequences of a drug once praised as safe and effective. Although Quaaludes accounted for less than 2% of total revenue, they generated about 98% of the company's legal troubles. Waves of lawsuits crashed down, deaths from misuse, addiction cases, accusations of inadequate warnings, each one adding unprecedented pressure. The media, with sensational headlines and emotionally charged stories, quickly turned Rohrer into a symbol of corporate irresponsibility and profit-driven callousness in the eyes of the public. Every lawsuit, every allegation, was another blow to the company's standing. The Quaaludes, once marketed as a safe sleep aid, had become the root of deeply personal tragedies and broader social harm. Newspaper photographs, heartbreaking accounts from families and victims, all of it combined into a grim portrait of what a medical product can unleash when exploited, overused, or insufficiently regulated. Even as Rohrer attempted to promote the drug's benefits and emphasize quality, its reputation continued to erode beyond repair. This crisis also opened the door to profound lessons about how the pharmaceutical industry treats its own products. Profit, an essential element of any business, can sometimes stand in direct conflict with social responsibility and ethical duty. Rohrer demonstrated that a single miscalculation, a failure of oversight, or an overconfident claim of complete safety can be enough to dismantle decades of credibility. When society, the legal system, and the media all push back at once, a company quickly realizes that its reputation, believed to be its most valuable asset, can disappear in a matter of years. Rohrer's downfall was not simply the story of one company, it became a wider reflection of the pharmaceutical industry at the time. Quaaludes stood as proof that even well-researched medical products with clear benefits can spark widespread crises when abused, when the public is not properly educated, and when risks are not communicated transparently. Regulatory frameworks existed, but they were not strong enough to prevent the devastating consequences of allowing a medication to seep into popular culture, and worse, into criminal misuse. Lemon, the company that later inherited production rights, was not spared from the shadow of crisis either. Despite attempts to rebrand, rebuild its image, and detach Quaaludes from associations with disco, addiction, and crime, every strategy fell short. The public continued to link the drug to stories of pleasure, misuse, and tragedy. The image of Quaaludes had already woven itself into the cultural memory, making any attempt at brand renewal virtually impossible. This illustrated a powerful truth: once a product becomes a cultural icon, whether for good or ill, it cannot be controlled by marketing or legal maneuvering alone. The collapse of the reputations of the companies behind Quaaludes underscored an unsettling reality: the pharmaceutical industry sometimes prioritizes profit over safety. When revenue becomes the primary focus, warnings, long-term risks, and potential consequences often fade into the background. Both Rohrer and Lemon paid a steep price. Not only financially, but also in public trust, corporate image, and industry standing. It became a lasting lesson that the pharmaceutical sector cannot survive on short-term gains alone. Ethical duty and social responsibility must remain at the forefront. Looking closely at this crisis, we see the deep contradictions at play. Quaaludes generated substantial profits at first, but they quickly became an uncontrollable liability. Pleasure turned into tragedy, popularity turned into risk, and what once seemed like an unshakable reputation proved astonishingly fragile. The pharmaceutical crisis in this case is a stark reminder of the limits of prioritizing profit and the essential need for responsibility. The legal and social consequences of producing and distributing Quaaludes did not stop at a single company. They rippled across the entire American pharmaceutical industry, forcing other organizations to re-examine their approaches to regulation, marketing, and consumer safety. Regulatory bodies like the FDA began tightening standards, improving warning systems, and raising clinical trial requirements. The Quaalude crisis became a historical lesson, showing that even beneficial drugs can trigger sweeping societal consequences when oversight and public awareness fall short. Equally notable was how the crisis revealed the interconnectedness of media, public sentiment, and corporate behavior. Sensational news articles, emotionally charged human interest stories, and a string of lawsuits combined to form immense public pressure. Companies were forced to confront the reality that short-term revenue cannot compensate for long-term reputational loss. In the modern world, a pharmaceutical company's reputation is priceless, a controversial product. Even one that brings temporary financial gain, can destroy consumer trust and damage the industry's credibility for years. The Quaalude crisis also raised significant questions about ethics and social responsibility. Pharmaceutical companies cannot focus solely on sales and revenue while ignoring risks to consumers and communities. Quaaludes demonstrated that even medications designed to help people can devolve into disasters when misused. And that a pharmaceutical company's responsibility extends far beyond simply manufacturing and selling a product. It includes protecting public health, shaping awareness, and ensuring safety on a societal level. After years of lawsuits, tragedies, and mounting public pressure, Rohrer and Lemon ultimately withdrew. Pfizer, the final corporate owner, halted production completely in 1982. This was an inevitable conclusion, one that followed a chain of crises too severe to reverse. Profit could no longer justify the damage to reputation, and a product that had become a cultural phenomenon, laden with both positive and negative symbolism, could never be fully controlled again. From the heights of the disco era, through waves of misuse and tragedy, the story of Quaaludes dragged the U.S. pharmaceutical industry into one of its most profound crises. It stands as vivid evidence that no financial gain can outweigh public trust, and no reputation can survive the erosion caused by neglecting ethical and social responsibility. Ultimately, this crisis serves as a powerful warning to the entire pharmaceutical world: safety, responsibility, and ethics must always come first. Without them, the consequences will extend far beyond expectation, and reputation, the most precious asset of all, may be destroyed beyond recovery. When the pharmaceutical crisis seemed to reach its peak, when the reputations of the companies that manufactured Quaaludes collapsed beneath the weight of lawsuits, accidents, and waves of abuse, a new force emerged, determined to reshape the entire narrative: the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA. If, in the past, Quaaludes had symbolized pleasure, euphoria, and tragedy, then in this new phase the story took a sharp turn, as the DEA became methaqualone's ultimate nemesis, confronting a drug that had once shaken popular culture and transforming it from a tool of entertainment into a target to be eradicated. This was not merely a legal battle, it was a defining struggle over how society controlled and confronted powerful substances. The DEA and the battle that changed history. The nemesis of methaqualone. This chapter reveals an uncompromising confrontation between a law enforcement agency and a drug responsible for countless tragedies. Once legal production stopped, the black market surged, and methaqualone became a prized commodity among criminal networks. The disappearance of legitimate supply triggered clandestine laboratories, where illegal manufacturing produced enormous profits at the expense of public health and the law. Faced with this reality, the DEA developed a bold, unprecedented strategy. They would not chase users, they would chase ingredients. This strategic shift transformed the DEA from a conventional regulatory body into a force targeting the very origins of the problem. Gene Hayslip, the central figure in this campaign, understood that stopping the spread of Quaaludes required eliminating its sources. The small pill known as methaqualone was born from chemical precursors largely produced in India, China, and parts of Europe. To control this network required international cooperation, meticulous planning, and unwavering resolve. This was not only a legal mission, but a battle of intellect, strategy, and courage, as black market laboratories constantly adapted, counterfeited, and resisted. The DEA's tactics introduced a new model for the war on drugs. Instead of arresting individuals one by one, they attacked the supply chain, cutting directly into the foundation of the criminal enterprise. This approach required patience, long-term vision, and global coordination. The DEA established an international web of surveillance and precursor controls, from shipping ports and chemical companies to underground labs. Every move was carefully calculated, designed to suffocate the flow of raw ingredients and leave black market operations unable to function. It demonstrated a profound shift in law enforcement philosophy, no longer targeting isolated addicts, but dismantling the roots of the crisis. The result was extraordinary. By the 1990s, Quaaludes became extinct in the United States. No legal manufacturer remained, and even the largest black market networks could not sustain supply. This victory represented far more than legal success, it was a triumph of strategy, showing that controlling raw materials, rather than pursuing individual users, could change the entire landscape of drug enforcement. It is often cited as one of the only true victories in the history of the war on drugs, a vivid testament to strategy, intelligence, and persistence. Another crucial aspect of this campaign was the impact on society and culture. Once Quaaludes vanished from the American market, the entertainment world and the drug scene shifted dramatically. The disco parties once glowing with light, rhythm, and intoxication suddenly felt different. The pill that had once softened the mind and loosened the body disappeared, leaving behind silence, consequences, and an empty space in the culture it once fueled. Underground labs, dealers, and users alike were forced to face an undeniable truth. The supply had dried up, and the era of exploiting this drug was over. The DEA not only reshaped the marketplace but transformed society's understanding of drug regulation. By targeting precursor chemicals, they introduced a new perspective: controlling abuse does not require chasing individuals, it requires controlling the entire supply chain. This strategic insight soon became a global model, studied and adopted by law enforcement agencies around the world. Quaaludes, once a medical product turned cultural icon, now served as a living example of the power of this approach. Furthermore, the DEA's success highlighted the importance of international cooperation. No single country could resolve this issue alone. Monitoring precursor chemicals, regulating production, and controlling imports and exports demanded close coordination between governments, law enforcement bodies, and the global chemical industry. It marked a strategic turning point, demonstrating that in an interconnected world, the fight against dangerous drugs must be shaped by alliances and cross-border collaboration. This campaign also illustrated the strength of determination and long-term strategy. Gene Hayslip and his team proved that patience, careful planning, and visionary thinking could overcome even the most widespread and deeply embedded drug problems. Quaaludes, once a symbol of exhilaration and destruction, became a case study in how legal frameworks and pharmaceutical oversight can reshape history when executed with precision and resolve. Looking deeper, the DEA's campaign was not only a legal success but a powerful social and ethical intervention. Once the supply was severed, users faced the reality that abusing this potent drug was no longer effortless, and drug-related crimes involving Quaaludes plummeted. It became living proof of how law, intelligence, and international collaboration can protect society from dangerous substances. Ultimately, the story of the DEA and Quaaludes reveals a profound truth: every crisis, every harmful product, can be contained when society, law, and the pharmaceutical sector work together with clarity, integrity, and resolve. Quaaludes, once a medical compound misused into cultural chaos, became a dual symbol of downfall and triumph, offering a lasting lesson in accountability, strategy, and comprehensive oversight. It stands as timeless evidence that when intelligence, determination, and ethics converge, even threats that seem impossible to control can be halted, and history can be rewritten. And from this victory, this absolute turning point, the story of Quaaludes entered its next chapter. The era of cultural legacy and cinematic revival, where the drug that once shook an entire generation would return as an icon on screen, evoking both thrill and tragedy, embedding itself into the memories of generations that never touched it but knew its legend. It is the next step in the journey, where history, culture, and entertainment intertwine, opening a new emotional and fascinating chapter in the saga of Quaaludes. When the DEA completed its long battle to trace raw materials, choke off the supply chain, and push Quaaludes to the brink of extinction in the United States, the story seemed to have reached its conclusion, yet instead, it opened into an entirely new chapter, the chapter of cultural legacy. Quaaludes, though no longer present in legitimate markets or even major black market circuits, continued to live on in the collective memory of society and in the works of entertainment that preserved its imprint. It became clear that a drug does not merely affect the human body and mind, it also possesses the power to shape culture, to echo through historical moments, social changes, and artistic expressions in profound and enduring ways. In this context, the substance that once shook the disco scene transformed into a cultural symbol, a point where pleasure, tragedy, and memory converged and retold its story through the lenses of film and media. Cultural legacy and cinematic revival. This phase paints a vivid panorama in which Quaaludes no longer serve as tools of entertainment or instruments of crime, but emerge as a symbol of an era long gone. In films such as The Wolf of Wall Street, the scene in which Leonardo DiCaprio drags himself across the floor after taking Quaaludes captures the very essence of the drug, a body losing all motor control while the mind remains trapped in a surreal, deceptive clarity. This moment is more than a humorous cinematic detail, it is a testament to the cultural force Quaaludes left behind. It lingers in the viewer's memory, vividly recalling the sensations, the thrill, and the danger the substance once carried. From a cultural perspective, Quaaludes embody the intersection of science, society, and art. They were never merely a medical product or a criminal tool, they became an emblem of pleasure, freedom, and the tragedies of the disco era. Even after disappearing from real-life usage, they are continually revived through film, television, music, and historical documentaries, allowing later generations to understand the emotions, rhythms, and spirit of a time both chaotic and vibrant. Their resurgence in film also prompts a renewed understanding of the drug's history. Scenes that portray abuse, euphoria, and loss of control help audiences recognize both the alluring and the destructive aspects of Quaaludes. These portrayals are not merely entertainment, they serve as bridges enabling younger generations to engage with larger social, ethical, and pharmaceutical questions. Through cinema, Quaaludes become a tool of historical education, reminding viewers that any medical invention can carry two faces, and unday. Understanding its true nature is essential to public well-being. The cultural legacy of Quaaludes is not restricted to Hollywood or the United States. In South Africa, a variant known as mandrax remains widely abused today, demonstrating that the drug's impact transcended borders and created distinct cultures of use across generations and regions. New chemical substances mimicking the effects of Quaaludes, designer drugs, continue to surface intermittently in Australia and other countries, signaling that the legacy persists, reshaping itself to meet the needs and impulses of its time. What is remarkable is that Quaaludes have become a symbol of contradiction, they evoke both pleasure and tragedy. Cinematic representations emphasize this duality, moving from moments of lighthearted euphoria to scenes of collapse, loss, and irreversible consequences. This tension is a major reason the drug persists so vividly in collective memory, not merely as an object, but as a cultural, emotional, and moral experience. Quaaludes also spark ongoing debates about ethics in popular culture. Their reappearance on screen does not function solely as entertainment, it highlights social issues such as drug abuse, pharmaceutical responsibility, and individual autonomy. These films remind viewers that short-lived pleasure often carries long-term risks, and that awareness of both benefits and dangers is essential in a modern society built upon scientific advancement. At the same time, cultural legacy is reflected in how Quaaludes remain intertwined with the disco era, its music, and its lifestyle. Nicknames like Disco Biscuits, Ludes, Lemons, and 714 were more than just street terms. They became cultural codes symbolizing a period defined by freedom, creativity, and risk. When these symbols appear in films, music, or documentaries, they do more than evoke nostalgia, they help audiences feel the rhythm, spirit, and emotional texture of a bygone era, bringing cultural experience to life with vivid immediacy. Quaaludes do more than linger in memory, they also inspire creative expression. Film, music, and visual art draw from the substance not merely to portray intoxication or loss of control, but to explore themes of ethics, freedom, responsibility, and societal consequence. Quaaludes thus become a form of artistic iconography, a meeting point where science, culture, and personal experience blend to recount the story of an era filled with contradictions yet overflowing with vitality. Another essential dimension is historical education. Through cinematic representations, Quaaludes become a medium through which younger generations understand social, ethical, and public health issues. Audiences witness both the abuse and its fallout, from personal disintegration to broader social impact. This indirect form of education proves remarkably effective, reminding viewers that any powerful substance requires proper understanding, oversight, and care. In addition, the cultural legacy of Quaaludes stands as a testament to the power of media and cinema in shaping public perception. When Quaaludes appear on screen, audiences are not merely watching entertainment, they are absorbing messages about pleasure, consequences, and personal accountability. This demonstrates that culture and art can function as potent tools for education, caution, and historical preservation, delivering emotional resonance that only mainstream media can create. Ultimately, Quaaludes, once a medical pill, a recreational tool, and a source of crime, have evolved into a lasting cultural symbol. Their legacy is not solely the story of pleasure or personal downfall, it is evidence of the complex interplay between science, society, and artistic expression. Quaaludes serve as a reminder that every scientific breakthrough, every medical product, has the potential to exceed its intended purpose and become part of culture, history, and collective memory. Thus, from the DEA's precursor crackdown to the disappearance of the drug itself, the Quaaludes story transitions into a vivid and enduring new chapter, cultural legacy and cinematic revival. The substance that once electrified an era now lives on in memory, on screen, and in popular culture, reminding the world of pleasure, tragedy, ethics, and responsibility. This final yet vibrant chapter affirms that the power of Quaaludes lies not only in its effects on the human body and mind, but in the cultural, artistic, and historical imprint it leaves for future generations. Pharmaceutical industry and society. When we step away from the shimmering glow of disco, when the Quaaludes no longer roar through the parties and exist only in cultural memory and cinema, the story appears to enter its final chapter. Where the lessons of the past are distilled and offered to the pharmaceutical world and to society as a whole. It is here that Part 10, The Message of the Age, Lessons for the Pharmaceutical Industry and Society, unfolds, not only as a warning, but as a sharp compass for those who hold power in research, manufacturing, and drug distribution. Quaaludes, born from an accidental scientific breakthrough, evolved into a symbol of pleasure, tragedy, and managerial failure, leaving behind powerful lessons that anyone in medicine or pharmaceuticals must remember. First, the story of Quaaludes emphasizes that any drug with legitimate medical benefits but strong pleasure-inducing effects inevitably carries the risk of abuse. This is true not only for Quaaludes but for all potent modern medications, from opioids like OxyContin to psychoactive stimulants. Humans, when presented with the opportunity to chase pleasure, will always find ways to misuse and stretch the boundaries of safety, ignoring warnings. Quaaludes vividly demonstrate that drugs are not merely chemicals, they shape human behavior, influence social dynamics, and transform culture. And without strict oversight, the consequences extend far beyond what anyone can foresee. Second, Quaaludes expose a harsh truth about the pharmaceutical industry: profits are sometimes placed above responsibility. Companies like Rohr, Lemon, and Pfizer prove that a product can generate revenue, prestige, and cultural impact, but a single misstep in governance, or a lack of transparency, can destroy everything. This serves as a powerful reminder that pharmaceuticals cannot survive by chasing short-term profits while disregarding long-term societal consequences. Flexibility in research, ethical responsibility in production, and transparency in marketing must stand as pillars ensuring that pleasure never transforms into tragedy. The third lesson lies in the capacity of society and legal systems to respond. When Quaaludes exploded into mainstream use, the response from regulators and society was sluggish, resulting in painful outcomes: abuse, accidents, crime, and death. However, the subsequent DEA campaign proved that with the right strategy, international cooperation, and long-term determination, even seemingly uncontrollable threats can be choked off. This underscores the necessity of timely action, strategic thinking, and global coordination in pharmaceutical oversight to protect communities from dangerous substances. Another crucial dimension is the cultural and educational impact of Quaaludes. Though they vanished from real-world circulation, they remain alive in cinema, media, and collective memory, serving as a tool for future generations to understand pleasure, tragedy, and ethical responsibility. Films such as The Wolf of Wall Street and various documentaries recreate the experiences and consequences of abuse, helping viewers recognize the thin line between entertainment and danger. Quaaludes demonstrate that culture and art can become powerful forms of education, reminding us of the repercussions of misuse and mismanagement. A deeper message lies in the inherent uncontrollability of certain substances. Quaaludes teach that some drugs cannot be fully regulated, contained, or managed through conventional means. The only way to prevent disaster is complete elimination. This is a cold but realistic truth for the pharmaceutical industry. Not every product can balance benefits and risks, and recognizing the limits of control is essential for survival. This lesson also extends to society at large. Quaaludes warn that humans will always push boundaries, and communities must establish protective measures, from education to legal frameworks, to minimize harm. Medicine and pharmaceuticals cannot act alone. Collaboration with public education, media, and law enforcement is essential to prevent individual tragedies from becoming collective disasters. The cultural legacy of Quaaludes also underscores the importance of transparency and responsibility in product marketing. Misleading advertisements and inaccurate safety claims played a significant role in the drug's widespread abuse. This proves that every message, every marketing strategy in pharmaceuticals carries ethical weight, and the consequences cannot be measured solely in revenue. Social responsibility, therefore, becomes an irreplaceable foundation of research, production, and distribution. The lesson of Quaaludes is also a reminder to remain vigilant toward new substances. The modern pharmaceutical landscape, filled with opioids, potent painkillers, and designer drugs, faces the same painful truth: even products created for health or benefit can become dangerous if misused. Quaaludes exemplify how popularity, culture, and human desire can turn a scientific invention into social catastrophe when strict oversight is absent. Finally, the overarching message of Quaaludes is the intersection of science, ethics, culture, and society. It reminds us that pharmaceuticals cannot operate in isolation. Every decision carries expansive consequences. Quaaludes show how an accidental discovery can affect millions, shape culture, spawn tragedies, and educate future generations. It is a vivid testament that medicine and pharmaceuticals must lead with responsibility, ethics, and foresight to protect health, trust, and public safety. From an accidental scientific origin, to the golden age of disco, through pharmaceutical crisis and the brutal DEA crackdown, the story of Quaaludes ultimately delivers a clear, forceful, undeniable message: some drugs cannot be controlled, cannot be educated into safe use, cannot be managed. They can only be eliminated entirely to protect humanity and society. This is a painful but realistic lesson that the medical field, the pharmaceutical industry, and the modern world must remember. In its journey of tragedy, pleasure, and history, Quaaludes become a stern but powerful teacher, leaving behind a legacy that transcends chemistry and medicine, now woven permanently into our cultural memory and collective understanding. As the journey through the story of Quaaludes comes to an end, we find ourselves standing before a sweeping panorama that is both mesmerizing and unsettling. From pills born out of medical coincidence, to icons of pleasure and disco, and eventually becoming targets hunted by the DEA, Quaaludes have shown that every scientific invention carries both light and shadow. Today's video does more than recount the history of a single drug, it opens a window into deeper lessons about humanity, society, and the pharmaceutical world. That brief moments of pleasure can lead to long-lasting tragedy, and that the power of science, when left without responsibility, can create consequences no one can foresee. The floating euphoria, the pulse of disco, the tragedies, and the victories of law enforcement, all converge in this story, forming an experience that is as captivating as it is chilling. As you close your eyes to sleep, let your imagination drift through the glowing lights of Studio 54, through the shadowed rooms of black market labs, and across global missions to track down chemical supplies, places where every Quaalude carries a story of its own. And if you wish to continue exploring the unexpected chapters of history, the little-known truths that still shape our world today, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments. The journey through history is far from over, and the next secrets are already waiting for you.